Welcome, everyone, to Data Discourse Podcast, Season 2, Episode 3. Today's episode, I'm very excited to talk about something that we probably all heard about, but don't know a whole lot about. And we have a special guest who I'll introduce here in just a second to get into this a bit further. But today's title is called Unmasking Human Trafficking Investigations and Digital Evidence. I'm your host, Pete Mansmann, CEO of Precise Inc. And our guests today are Ashley Miller, who's an investigator and CSEC Child Welfare Support Specialist from CSI Corporate Security and Investigations, LLC, and Jeff Stiegler, who's Director of Digital Forensics, Precise. I want to thank you both for joining us. Ashley, our audience has met Jeff previously, so I thought we could start this off with you giving a little more of a description of who you are and a little bit of your background, and then we'll talk a little bit more about today's very important topic and get into the specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's a very exciting opportunity. Well, a little bit about me. So before I came to work for CSI, which is Corporate Security and Investigations, LLC, I did a lot of work on the defense side, specifically with sex assault cases. And I worked those cases nonstop for a good 3 years. And then I decided that I wanted to do more work on the victim side. And so I wanted to switch and help those that were affected by these crimes, but as opposed to those that were charged with a crime. So after doing that, I then went to be a domestic violence advocate. I would go with women to court and men, let them know what their victim rights are, what their options are, and just do kind of like a safety plan for them moving forward. I also helped out in a shelter for domestic violence, women and children. And then from there, I saw a really great opportunity to go work for CSI to locate missing and runaway, high-risk youth. And from there, I got really involved with some of the cases that were given to me that were just more than a runaway. They were actually missing children. It was for a reason. And it wasn't even just the runaway piece. There was a whole lot more to that. And so in working with CSI, I was able to be trained as a certified human trafficking investigator. I went through 40 some hours of training to get that certification. So I'm going to definitely, capitalize on that. But just working with the vulnerable high-risk youth and understanding, trying to put myself in their position, meeting them where they are, has brought me to where I'm at today, which is I specifically work cases involving commercial sexual exploitation, most involving, youth throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And here we are.
Well, and if I got this correct, because I think we met and talked about this topic, very important topic, over lunch a bit. And if I understand your background, you started at the Allegheny County Public Defender's Office, correct? And that's mainly helping to defend people charged with a crime who may not have the resources to hire their own attorney. Everybody has a right to an attorney, so the Public Defender's Office steps in. So that's where you sort of started in this area. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. I started, I was able to be a part of the creation of a major felony unit. And for that, because people do have a right to have a defense just as much as someone that can hire a private attorney, we really focused in on investigations and how we could defend our client to the best of our ability so that they had a fair trial.
And these are all criminal cases when we're talking about defendants, correct? Primarily, everything you did was is in the criminal court system?
Correct. They are all criminal cases charged with a crime anywhere from retail theft all the way to homicide.
Gotcha. And it sounded like that at some point in your experiences with that, you sort of started gravitating towards, and I'm guessing you had to deal with cases that dealt with human trafficking, that dealt with exploited children, and your mind started going in that direction. And it sort of took you to say, I would rather work on that side of the case, and that sort of drove you into the direction that you ultimately sit in today. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I worked those cases specifically for a good 3 years that were involving crimes against children. Also, I would see cases where there would be a woman and or a male coming into the office and they were charged with prostitution. And retail theft and possibly something else. But just wondering, has anybody ever asked these individuals, is this something that they are doing voluntary, or are they forced into doing this behavior? And because of that, they are now facing a criminal charge. So those cases always had an interest to me. I always did the best I could to talk with the person that was charged with the crime to try to get a feel of what actually was going on, if we could help in any way. Allegheny County does have a specific court for, those types of cases. So that's a really good thing. But when you're defending someone that's charged with a crime, that is going to follow you forever,
Right.
being charged with a crime. But are they committing that crime because they're being forced to do or coerced into do something that they don't want to? And are they maybe addicted to drugs or alcohol? And the only way that they can see to get by is by doing something that they're forced or coerced to do, to basically just live every day, get the drug that they need to survive.
Well, and it sounds like, and I think this is part of a problem, if you will, with the criminal system, is that it's very easy to take a little snapshot in time and say, hey, you did something bad or horrible that's against society's wishes and the norms, and we need to hold you accountable to that. But the picture is usually bigger than that. And I think what you're describing here is probably pretty common, that there's a lot of things that typically lead up to allowing someone to get there. And in your role today, helping to stop exploitations and trafficking, especially of younger people and children, may stop these behaviors that ultimately get someone, charged with a crime as an adult. That's important.
Correct. It's, we don't rescue children or adults. Everyone rescues themselves at a point. But at least you're planting that seed. Even if they're not ready to get out of the life, they may years from now reach out and remember just a little bit of what you had talked with them about, which may help them not to continue into this, into the life, and know that they have people that they can count on to help them, get them resources, refer them to people that, they can rely on to help them out of a situation.
Well, I mean, there's no question. I don't think anybody listening to this is going to doubt the importance of the work you do. And, we talked over lunch that, so now, if I'm correct, in your role with CSI, you're primarily working with agencies across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you quoted something over lunch that I thought was very important and very impressive to put out there, is that how many missing exploited children were found last year through CSI?
And so CSI in the year of 2024 had located over 1,100 missing children. Now, I don't have the exact statistics on which of those children are specifically those that were exploited, but we had 1,100 missing children, and that's only part of the counties that we work with throughout the state of throughout Pennsylvania.
That's
so
impressive.
imagine if we worked the entire state.
Right. That's important work. And one of the things, I mean, our topic here today is human trafficking, and obviously your investigations in this that we're going to get into. And the reason why we asked Jeff to join this is because Jeff's experience as a digital forensic examiner, there's certainly some crossover between, what you have to do to find somebody and what he would do on devices and things like that potentially could come to bear in terms of finding people through their electronic means, because we live in this electronic world. But importantly, I think we should describe, or at least define for the audience, what human trafficking means. Because when you first brought this topic to me, or in my mind, it's like, oh, these are people who overseas are bringing in minor children, usually women, who are being sexually exploited for prostitution. That's in my mind, and I came to understand that that's part of it, could be, but it's much broader than that, and it's much more local than that. And so maybe we can kick this whole thing off with a description of what you define as human trafficking, and how is it prevalent in Western Pennsylvania?
So I'm just going to, there's two specific definitions. There's a federal definition of human trafficking, and then there's also a Pennsylvania specific statute to address commercial sexual exploitation and trafficking. So human trafficking under the federal definition is to elicit, to recruit, harbor, transport, provide, obtain, solicit a person for the benefit of such activities to where the person will be caused to engage in a commercial sex act. And when we say commercial sex act, we're not just talking about prostitution or exotic dancing or pornography. It actually includes, internet-based crimes. So you have these, these apps out there, these websites. If there's something being exchanged for something and there's force, fraud, and coercion, that also is included and considered a commercial sex act. So while you need force, fraud, and coercion to be there for it to constitute federal definition of human trafficking, those do not need to be there for it to be a crime involving a minor under the age of 18.
Okay.
So, for example, commercial sex act, it means any sex act on which anything of value is given to or received by a person. So that could mean many different things besides just money. So anything of value. What's valuable to me might not be valuable to you or Jeff. So it's anything of value. If you are asking someone to perform a sex act for anything that they consider something of value, that is by law considered trafficking.
So that could be something like food or shelter or clothing or drugs. It doesn't have to be a monetary transaction. It's anything that maybe they need or they want, and they're, whoever is providing that is using that as their bargaining chip for some type of sexual act.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
it's seen so often in both adults and children. Survival sex. They're out there, they need their basic needs met, like the hierarchy, Maslow's hierarchy. They need your basic needs met, your food, shelter, your clothing, your safety. And they are exploited to basically feel that they need to provide something in return for those needs.
Right. And again, we talked about this over lunch a little bit, that I think people can say, oh, well, a desperate homeless kid who needs shelter or is on drugs, that's the common situation, but that's not it. It sounds like the gamut of exchange, or the gamut of the way that some of these predators can groom a child in particular into falling into this trafficking description, can be lots of things. And it can be the kid in Mount Lebanon who comes from a good family but's lonely and getting attention from somebody online. Could you describe some of those things to kind of give people an idea of the breadth of how prevalent this can be?
Yeah, sure. So the trafficking, like human trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, can happen anywhere. Anyone can be a trafficker. It could be the people that you would never even think. It could be a teacher. And we've seen a lot of cases involving priests or, those kinds of things. It can really be anyone can be a trafficker. It doesn't matter from where they're from, if they live in, Fox Chapel or Sewickley to, a low poverty income area. Anybody can be a trafficker, and anyone really can be a victim, because it starts off with the grooming, right? So you're feeling something, you're being vulnerable, and that person's preying on that. They're basically filling that void that you're looking for. And there is like a trauma bond that is established, right? And that's so hard to break. But what I've seen is that bond is so strong that the individual will do anything to either make that person happy, or to make sure that that person will provide them with safety, with housing, with food, with love.
Right.
So it really can happen to anyone. And then, once you have that trauma bond, it's extremely hard to break, because they learn to love their trafficker.
Well, and interestingly, where we sit today in the middle of May, 2025, there's a nationally known case going on right now, the Sean Combs P. Diddy case. And anybody who's listening to this in the next few months is going to know what we're talking about. But trafficking is a part of the claims that are being brought against him. And if you read some of what's happening in that case just in the last day or two, one of the main witnesses against him, an ex-girlfriend, goes by the name Cassie, and she was the one who people saw the elevator footage of him hitting her and abusing her in the elevator footage, and kind of kicked this whole thing off. And what you just described is a lot of what she said on the stand. She said, "I did all these things. I let him abuse me. I did all these horrific things I would never do on my own because I loved him. I wanted to please him. I wanted to be in this circle of influence and these celebrities and the money and the power and all the things." And she was just drawn into that and said that in any normal circumstance would she let these things happen to her? Absolutely not. But she was under his influence. And it's exactly what you just described. It's this aura of these people who can groom or groom really well, or are big personalities, or in that case just totally wipes away what they would not normally do for themselves.
Yeah, it's been
I,
described as like this complete brainwashing from survivors that I've talked to, where they just do anything and everything for that person. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if the person's hurting them or they're not getting, this or that after having to be on the street. There's that bond that they don't want to let it go. That's all that they have. That's their everything.
Going back to the P. Diddy case, I know like part of Cassie's questioning and whatnot revolved around her also committing some acts that would fall under things we've labeled as trafficking. And I know we touched upon this in our conversation too, where there's scenarios where the victim also can become the perpetrator in some instances, and whether that holds them back from disclosing things that are going on to them, or the fear of, hey, I'm going to get in trouble too if I make these things that I'm going through being known. That seems to be a big part in some of these instances as well.
Well, it's a lot of blackmailing going on too, and part of what you hear is he's filming all these things and saying, I got film of all this, and if you don't want this to come out, and the more that he can suck people into his world and committing the same acts, now they're part of his conspiracy. And I think he did all that knowingly, and in my opinion, and did it to protect himself and keep things going on. But yeah, it's interesting because what we're talking about right now is very topical to that point. And I think the trafficking element kind of goes to the definition you were describing, where he's using drugs and coercion and power and money to convince people to do sexual acts against their will. He's going to claim it was consensual and they're adults and this is all what they agreed to do. But we'll see what happens in this trial. But that's an idea of trafficking. And I think what you're describing of, look, you get these people that can groom somebody, and it's a priest, it's an uncle, it's a teacher, it can be a stranger. Let's talk a little bit about how this happens, because I think you were describing a lot that this is online, and it's a fear of any parent that's out there, I'm sure, of like online grooming of their kid. We're all online. Our kids are on games online and all these social media applications. There's, as much as you may try to protect them and keep them from access, you can't in its entirety, and they're going to be exposed to some of this stuff. And so maybe we can, because this is where the investigations start to come into play, and where digital forensics can come into play as well, is to start to say, how do you see people are getting groomed? And are there signs, like for a parent that's out there, to say, look, never 100%, but here's some things you can be on watchful for that might make you say, I need to look into this a little further.
Right. I think that the biggest defense against grooming, or it even getting to sexual exploitation, is for parents and guardians, caregivers, to be aware, just be educated. There's so many different websites out there that offer education, online safety, for parents, for guardians and caregivers, that will provide you with clues, like context of conversations where it probably might not be normal for your child to be having this conversation with this person that you may not even know. For example, if you have a 11 or 12-year-old that's having adult conversations, that should be a warning for you to maybe see what that's about, maybe have a conversation, try to get some more information. There's just be in the know, be aware, have conversations with your children to try to protect them. You can't.
Well, you describe some things because sometimes maybe the parents don't even know these conversations are ongoing, and I would imagine a lot of times that's the case. They don't know that this is even happening. But you described a few things to be like, hey, look for these kind of behaviors or these things that are happening that could be visible that may make you want to dig into that a little bit more. Can you describe what some of those things are?
Yeah. So in the initial grooming process, you might not see a child really coming home from school or from an activity late at night with, multiple cell phones or clothes that they can't afford. Or if you have a child that is very social and involved in sports activities, and then all of a sudden you can slowly see the progression of them being more isolated. They want to just be on their phone, and then they are locking their bedroom door kind of thing, trying to be very secretive. Those are things that should raise a red flag, like, hey, something's going on. Not saying at all that it is absolutely what is going on, but just be aware of those things and try to look into it.
Enough to have a conversation. Those are things that, at least in your mind, would be like, talk to them, find out is
Have a
something happening.
conversation. Yep.
Yeah. And so the idea of trafficking, I would assume, typically starts with some type of grooming, and it's not this big criminal conspiracy necessarily that it's all these people, gathering up young girls to sell them in some prostitution ring out of a horrible hotel in New York City. It could be that someone is grooming a child to potentially ask for sexual favors in return for something later on. Maybe it is they're acting like an online pimp and they are offering them up to somebody else. It could be that they're trying to get nudes from them for child pornography, or it could be all sorts of things that they could be grooming them towards. They are all trafficking. It's the same thing. They're exploiting minors, typically for some sexual reason, but it could be others. But sexual, I'm assuming, is what you see most of the time, and that is trafficking. Is that a fair description of what that is?
Yes, by definition, by law, if a child has received something in return for a sex act, because here's the thing, a child under the age of 18 can never consent to selling their body, selling content, right? There is no such thing as a child prostitute. It does not exist. Under the age of 18, a child cannot consent to selling their body. So if that is happening, that would be considered trafficking and could be charged both federally and through Pennsylvania statute. Of course, law enforcement would obviously make the determination as to what charges would be applicable. But if there's a situation or someone tells me that, look, I heard this, or I think that this person is paying this child for sex favors, or this child has a lot of, expensive clothing and she's got outfits daily, different purses, always has her eyelashes done, which is not so much of a thing because everyone has their eyelashes done lately, but just
I haven't
things
had
that are
mine
like,
done in a while, by the way. So
that's awesome. But things that just, the family can't afford. And all of a sudden this child has all these things and they're coming home late or leaving early.
yeah. Well, and so I think you've done a good job of describing how exploitation sort of comes to be, and it's, again, not this big formal thing. I'm sure it can just creep up over time and can come from all these different directions. But the child's exploited, the child's trafficked. That's where you get involved in investigating. And can you describe some of the things that you're trying to investigate? Because sometimes it sounds like you're trying to locate people that they don't know where they are. But there's
Correct.
other times where it sounds like maybe you know where they are, but you're trying to figure out, is there an exploitation happening? Is there trafficking happening, even though we know where somebody is? And they may not be willing to participate in telling you a whole lot at that point. Is that, how do you get involved in the investigations, and how do those typically look?
So we're contracted with various agencies throughout Pennsylvania. So we may sometimes get a phone call for a consult. There's A, B, and C going on. This isn't normal behavior for this child or this individual. And then there's information that could be provided to make me and my team think like, there's probably something going on here. Those cases, they're not able to be worked right away. It's a process of working a case. There's so much information that you would need to look at to determine if there's exploitation going on, because there would need to be exploitation before there would be commercial sexual exploitation.
Right.
And so it just takes a bit to try to figure things out, but that's where I get in. So I get as much information as I can from whatever agency I'm working with at the time. And if I see certain things, and I'm really big on following my intuition with these cases, if something doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. So then that, you're able to take a further work. And it's actually like a team effort. It's not just me independently. I do work with a team, and we just look at the case and the circumstances, the behaviors, basically everything that's just provided to us to determine if there are concerns. And then if there are concerns that warrant us enough to be able to say, this is commercial sexual exploitation. We work very well with a law enforcement, specifically, the Attorney General's office, as well as the FBI, to determine if, this is something that they might be interested in, if they're seeing the same thing that we are. And then from there, once law enforcement gets involved, we pretty much kind of just step to the side and is mainly like that advocate, that contact, the middle person between the agencies that we work with and law enforcement, so that we kind of bridge that gap.
Well, and I think, and Jeff, I'd like to turn this over to you for a minute, because what Ashley just described, now Precise typically isn't involved in criminal cases. And certainly I would never claim that human trafficking, the great work you do, is something we are ever involved with, or very rarely if we ever come even sort of across it. But what I think is important, and what makes is a relevance here to what Jeff does primarily, is that some of the investigative sources, if you will, that I'm guessing that law enforcement takes on, but it could happen earlier, could even happen in your stages, or the types of things that Jeff might be doing for civil cases that are out there. And so, Jeff, two areas I think would be interesting to talk about are, let's say you have an exploited child. We'll use this as an example. We don't know where they are. We don't have a physical device from them, but we're trying to see, is there some way we can find where they are? Now, Ashley's going to be doing the gumshoe work of talking to people and finding out who the friends are. Do they know anything, and the rest of it? But what are some digital breadcrumbs that you as an investigator may be looking at to say, is there anything we can tie together that would at least point us in certain directions?
I mean, I think just with with a specific age group we're dealing about here, number one's going to be social media. I feel like it's probably going to be the most used, as well as the fact that it is a form of communication. And a lot of these allegations and behaviors and activities are going to be, occurring in the space where communications occurred. It's important to know, hey, everyone knows about Facebook and Snapchat and, the things you've heard of. But for everyone you've heard of, there's dozens that you haven't heard of. And a lot of these third-party applications might, do an even better job of deleting conversations, or keeping things private, or encrypting X, Y, and Z, or making it harder for people like us to determine, hey, what's actually going on from a digital evidence perspective. There's going to be a lot of, potential roadblocks. In my brief foray into working on some of these cases, you kind of see it in a lot of the activities, these groups doing these kind of horrendous things are occurring in social media, third party, Kik, Messenger, Snapchat, it's out there on the majorly available platforms. So I think, first of all, identifying What kind of accounts where are accounts made? Where do they use the accounts? Things like that would be step one.
And I think, and Ashley, I know CSI does some of this, and there are companies out there. One of our prior episodes this season was talking to a company called SMI Aware who does social media investigations. So there's different ways of tackling this, but I think one of the things that you look at is you say, all right, well, what do we know? It's not like, if Ashley Miller was an exploited child that was out there, that Ashley Miller is going to show up on every one of these platforms as Ashley Miller. You may have a handle, you may have a different name or a pseudonym. It's those breadcrumbs and starting to find it, and it's saying, hey, we know this account is associated with this person. They're using this email address or this name. Where else does it show up? That kind of stuff is what sort of incrementally gets you to say, what can we find out about them? How much of our picture can we fill in by this social footprint? And I think, and Jeff, this would be a question I think towards you, is that, on some of these platforms anyway, do some of them have even the ability to have some geographic sort of pinpointing of where somebody might be based upon the features of the platform?
Most do, whether that's, readily or even feasibly available is, another aspect. For example, to make an Instagram account, you need an email address. If you wanted to file enough subpoenas and whatever, you can probably determine, where that email address was when it registered the account. But those are all, like I said, subpoena actions and things that take time and things you have to know about their existence in the first place to even start, looking deeper into.
What about things like check-in features, though?
Yeah, so a lot of user-based interactions are great sources, and sometimes they're the only sources. You can watch as much, episodes of CSI or, movies involving some of this stuff as you want. And the truth is, it doesn't really behave like that in real life. Your device isn't recording every single second what you're doing, where you're at, what's on the screen. A lot of times we have the general picture around that. And, as experts, we try to put the puzzle pieces back together to tell the story. But a lot of times that puzzle is going to be very incomplete, and you're going to have to be, guessing or forming your best opinion on actually what's going on in some of these areas you don't have data or you won't have data.
Yeah. When I think there's even things like photographs that, depending on how you get it or if you have access to it, and let's face it, there's a lot of people posting videos and photos out there this is how they're documenting their social life. A photograph may contain GPS coordinates on it, and people may not realize this is on there. Some videos can contain location information because it's relevant to either where it was posted or where it was taken. And some of those things can potentially help to locate at least where those photos were taken, where that maybe it's the breadcrumbs. And it's not like you're going to go to one site and it's going to say Ashley Miller is exactly here at this point in time, but it starts to tell you, oh, she's over in New Jersey and she has family there, friends there, and that's where we need to focus our attention, type of thing. And actually, I'm guessing, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's the type of stuff that you're looking for to really hone in your focus.
Right. So, first of all, when you mentioned CSI, Jeff, you made that comment. Because of my badge, like, oh, you mean like the show CSI? So I have to no, not really. I wish though, but no. But yeah, so some of that information that we do get from agencies could possibly be, a child is missing right now. We don't know where they are. So social media is so important because, like you said, everyone's using social media, especially the children. They want to post, where they are, who they're with. So yeah, that's a very important is, who are their friends? Who are their associates? Who's liking their photos and their videos? Can we tell from the background where they might be? Is there anything in the background, that sticks out? I'm really big on landmarks. I'm not really good with street signs, even with directions. I'm very geographically challenged, but landmarks are a big thing that I tend to focus on to try to get me an idea of where this person may be. And if this child is going across state lines, that's absolutely a concern.
Well, it's federal.
Who were they with?
For sure.
How did they get there?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think ChatGPT and some of these other AI engines now, they're getting better and better, where you can load a picture and say, where was this taken? and it will analyze background and say, oh, I know that mountain range or that body of water or whatever it is. And I mean, there's so many different tools that can help you say, and again, maybe it's accurate, maybe it's not, but it's better than just saying I have no idea. Um,
Right.
and anything, if it lines up with what you know based on your investigation of the background of this person, this kid, where they may have friends or associates or likelihoods that can again hopefully put you in the right direction so you're more quickly locating where they are.
Right. It's like one of the first things that I look at is their social media. Is there anything that's suggestive on there that would tell me or my team that there's possible exploitation going on here?
Are you usually limited at this stage by what's available publicly, or are you finding, hey, we know the Facebook password, let's log into the account?
No. So we don't do things like that. It's all basically public information. We also have like an open source intelligence investigator who's fantastic. And she really has worked these cases so often that she knows what to look for on social media that would give us like an indication that it's more than just a missing child situation. And then to be honest, the cases that are involving true commercial sexual exploitation are not necessarily runaways per se. Like they're not gone enough in enough time for them to be reported as missing long enough to where by the time I would get a case, then I would go and find them, they would already be home. And actually,
Right.
those are the ones that are more concerning to me than the actual missing children that are gone and we don't know how long, couple days, or where they are.
So in that instance, would a good example be, hey, it's somebody who maybe didn't come home that night, and then they come home the next day. Parents or guardians or whoever are pissed at them for not coming home that night, but they're home. And this is their pattern that happens every so often. It could be clearly exploitation, but they're not a missing person at that point. And maybe that even allows it to fall through the cracks quicker because they're not being reported as missing, yet they're still being exploited. Is that an example of what you just described?
Yeah, so if that pattern starts to show where they are leaving at night, coming home early in the morning, and maybe the parent doesn't, because it's becoming like a pattern, maybe they think, oh, well, I'm going to wait and see if they come home by, 11 p.m. And if not, then I'll report them as missing. So they may not be gone long enough for the parent to warrant actually reporting them as missing. But if they're coming home and they're coming home under the influence or different outfits or condoms in their purse or multiple cell phones. Like those are definitely things that you want to be on the lookout for. And especially if the pattern continues and instead of it just being a couple hours, it keeps progressing.
So, and it sounds like again, a parent who would be one on the lookout for this, or things you're looking for to say, do I just have a kid who's acting out? Do I have a kid who's just running away because they don't want to be home versus somebody who's being exploited? Again, it really goes back at least some of the pieces that you want to be looking at that right in front of your eyes, or do they seem like they're having access to money that they shouldn't be having access to? And that may be showing up in terms of new clothes. Like you said, multiple phones would definitely be something because, like, what are you hiding on a second phone that you don't want me to see? Any
And
kind
you're
of,
paying for them.
yeah, right.
I can't afford to pay for my child to have multiple cell phones if, I don't even do that for me. Why? There's no reason.
Yeah, that was one that you raised. I didn't even think about that. I'm like, yeah, if I saw my kid with two phones, I'd immediately be like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Um, but you had mentioned that your internal social media investigator who's looking for stuff will often spot things that indicate to her, hey, this is a higher likelihood of exploitation or things we should be concerned about. Do you know what any of those things are that she'll bring to your attention to be like, this is concerning, and what would those be and why?
Sure. We are very equipped as private investigators. We have access to multiple different databases that, just the general public don't have access to. So if she is on social media and say that they're the friend list, you got all these clearly, they're clearly adults. And they're the ones that are liking the photos or commenting on the photos. Some of the comments could be inappropriate. We will then identify that individual and we will find out how old they are, where they live. We can go back to 5 degrees until their 18th birthday and find out all of their relatives. And that's really important too, because when we do collaborate, if we find something, we want to alert law enforcement, like, hey, this is probably really something that needs to be on your radar. We can then give them all this information and it kind of gets them a head start and lets them know, like, this is serious. This is what's going on. Look, you can see it.
Right. And if you turn it over to law enforcement, they now have the warrant power to see someone's phones or electronic devices and things like that. That opens up a whole nother, Pandora's box of data that can be helpful in determining what's going on here or not. And I guess, Jeff, I'd shift this back to you and say, let's assume that's the case. And I know in your typical role, you really can't access devices unless there's consent or a subpoena or agreement between parties that are in a lawsuit. But let's just hypothetically say at this point you're acting like law enforcement, or you have access to a phone in this situation. Just generally speaking, what kind of things can be available on a phone, particularly if you're looking for the general categories of, like, hey, is this person being manipulated? Are they being exploited? Who are they communicating with? Where have they been? What kind of things are you looking for on a phone that might tell you that, or at least tell you these are other areas that we should be looking at?
I'm starting to see more options, as far as, we're calling it triage within the forensic field. What can we quickly do that's not a waste of time, whether for accounts of admissibility or, is the data worth going after? So, the days of, hey, if we want to look at a cell phone at all, I need the cell phone physically in front of me in my hands as an expert are, just starting to maybe go away a bit. There's still always a need for that thorough, on hand, but what we're seeing are, some products and solutions now which offer, hey, you're nowhere near the user. Here's a remote solution that lets us get some basic information, and the basic information, from phone triage are, what accounts are on there, usernames, how much how much media is being used, sent. It's anything to give you that, 10, 15,000, foot view of, hey, is this device worth either pursuing in more detail, or, is there enough here to just, launch the full investigation? So that's becoming an option now, kind of the rapid response. What can we get quickly? It's going to be interesting to see, that being used by, specifically law enforcement and agencies, without the bottleneck of, just going through the whole process of a formal forensic phone examination.
Yeah. And I'm sure, Ashley, you would love to have access to people's phones all the time, but wrenching them out of someone's hands is next to impossible without agreement.
I'll take all the phones as long as I can have the passwords with them.
Right. Do you find, Ashley, are there other electronic sources? So we've talked about social media and phones, and I would guess that's the bulk or the majority or maybe all of what you typically are seeing and looked at. But you ever come across any other data sources along those lines that can become valuable in doing your investigations, or is it largely limited to those two sources?
I'm trying to think. I would say no, I have not come across any other electronic devices besides cell phones, iPads, computers. Yeah, I can't think of one. It's usually all of those, because there's a lot of communication going back and forth. Kids don't want to leave their cell phones.
No, and that's what we found in our years of doing this, is that you can pretty accurately describe who someone is by looking at their phone. You know what they do, who they interact with, what places online they spend time, and it gives you a pretty quick picture if you have access to that. And again, some of those are outside of the phone now, where their social media, their web-based platforms, there are other things that are like that. But that phone itself still becomes a critical part if you can never get access to it. Certainly is the case in civil cases.
Absolutely. Same.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. I mean, we've talked about how important it is to investigate these. We need to protect children as much as we can. You have to define whether someone's just missing or are they actually being exploited. And if they're being exploited, how do you A, protect them, find them, protect them, B, get law enforcement involved so that they can take appropriate actions at that point. Do you have any stories you can tell of some positive outcomes that have come from the hard work you've done in some of your investigations?
Sure, absolutely. One that really comes to mind that I'm going to just briefly touch on, an agency had contacted us. There were 2 missing youth that were in a specific county, and they were missing from another county. And we're talking about a 4-hour difference between counties.
Okay.
And so they were asked if we could go to this county where the children are believed to be and try to find them. Okay. Our team's really good at locating missing children. That's basically,
Well, finding 1,100 last year would be proof of that.
could you imagine? I know so many kids. Wow. So I had someone come with me. We went ahead and traveled directly that night. And what we did was a lot of canvassing. So there were text messages being sent to individuals, but they weren't disclosing their location. But there were things in the background that were starting to look familiar in the area that we were in. So what we did was we had canvassed the area. And long story short, that they ended up reaching out to someone that they trusted to meet them somewhere. So that meet had occurred and we didn't disrupt that at all. We had waited for them to get back to the house that they were actually staying at. When we found the location, we ran the location through all of our database resources that we have through our open source intelligence investigator, and come to find out that the individual that had owned this home was a violent offender, a lot of gun charges, not a safe person. And we were able to identify a couple people that came back to that specific address and location. So at that point, because it's a new area for us and it's a very, very inner city area where we were at, it was no longer probably the safest for us to continue to be canvassing the streets. Now we know where they're at.
Right.
It's time. So we contacted law enforcement at that point and said, we have a court order. We believe these kids are in danger. They're not supposed to be here. This isn't their home. They don't know these people. Can you assist us? They said, absolutely, not a problem at all. When the officers went to the door, there was an initial argument between one of the children that were involved. And I'll get back to that in a minute because that's going to go back to how sometimes interaction with law enforcement affects the children that are commercially sexually exploited. So turns out like they ended up coming out. We got both of the children. One of them was put in the back of my company vehicle. The other one was put into the back of an ambulance to try to calm her down. So the individual, the young girl that was in my back of my vehicle, I didn't ask her any questions. Only thing I did ask her was, are you okay? Is there anything that I can do for you at this moment to make you feel safe? And at that point, she just started vomiting all this information, right? And the information that she was disclosing was basically telling me, we have been in this house, forced to be in a basement at gunpoint. This individual would constantly put fear into us, showing us his weapon, having it on him at all times, putting it down near us. Not necessarily, I shouldn't say like putting them at gunpoint. I should say that putting the fear into them that, hey, I have a weapon, and them being forced to stay in the basement of this home. And in exchange for them having somewhere to stay, they felt they had to provide sex in return. So that disclosure made by by that young girl, she allowed me in enough, trusted me enough to say what was going on because she wanted help. She didn't want to be there anymore.
Right.
But she also had disclosed information about the other child as well. After that, we spent the entire evening with both of these children into the next day, and then traveling back and forth with them, making sure, walking them into these new homes for them where they're safe. These are great homes, helping them with their, all of their luggage getting in there, helping them get situated before we, had left the facility. But that story and that experience for me was so humbling because I never expected that. There were no, other than them being in this house and running away, I wasn't expecting to hear everything that I was able to hear. And that child was so brave that she was able to describe in detail this perpetrator and exactly where this firearm was stored. And it was just such a humbling moment that these children that don't identify as victims, right? They don't identify themselves as victims because they really don't understand what's happening to them. But for her to allow me in enough and trust me enough to tell me the most horrific thing that has happened to her is just such an experience that I will never forget. And so if it's just one person that we can help out of a situation like that, and for them to know that there's just this one person that really does care about you and doesn't want anything in return, then what we're doing is worth it.
Guardian angel.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can say it or not, but how young were these girls?
They were under the age of consent.
So
which is
under
16. Under the age of
16.
16. Yes.
Okay. Wow.
And it all started from this individual seeing them hanging around at a convenience store, basically waiting to see how long they were there for to determine if they had somewhere to go. And it all started from that. Oh, you can stay here. You're safe here. You're not safe out here on the streets.
And then
Just
between
like
a
that.
combination of fear and making them feel like living in a basement was an exchange for them, he was forcing sex on them. It's crazy.
Yes. And there was, an exchange of drugs too. Marijuana. They wanted to get high. Most marijuana is just, it's so out there. It's not like I'm not saying that it's good or bad or anything like that, but in order for them to get what they wanted to get high, but it's like dangling this carrot. Well, if you want this is what you have to do.
Yeah.
And they're kids.
Yeah. And it's so scary to just think that there are predators out there that are like that, are just waiting around to see where they can exploit someone like that. And thank God there's people like you out there that are looking out for them. Do
Yes.
you ever get the chance to see someone years later and see whether or not they were able to pull themselves out of all that?
Yeah. So actually, right now, some of the cases that I am, privileged to work with and beside, I've seen them at their worst, and I'm seeing them getting better and through trauma therapy and having a safe place and, having their basic needs met and just working with, a lot of different professionals that are helping them through all these things. You can see the positive changes that are being made, how even their language just slowly changes. So just to be able to see that progression. And then I get invited to birthday parties from the kids that I work with. That I'm like so honored to have that because at one point they wouldn't say anything. I had
Oh,
to
yeah.
earn that trust.
I'm sure initially you were the enemy.
Absolutely. I'm the
You
one
know?
that's finding you out in the street. I'm taking you away from something that you think and you have become to believe that is that it's your life. This is how it has to be. So I'm the bad person initially, right?
Right.
But in the end, it's so worth it because they see that I'm not the bad guy.
Well, they just don't have the perspective yet to realize that, what's going on around them isn't normal, isn't healthy, isn't right. And
Absolutely.
that's why they're children. They
Yeah.
they haven't been given that time yet to figure that all out.
Absolutely.
Right? Well, actually, you sure make it the work that we do, Jeff and I do, seem pretty inconsequential in comparison to the
I've never been
good things we
invited to a
do.
birthday party because
I
of
know, I'm just
that.
supposed to go to one tomorrow, so we'll see. 16.
Right.
Woo!
No, it's been wonderful, and I know we're coming up on our hour here, and this has been a fascinating topic, and great to hear that there are good people like yourself out there that are fighting the good fight. If anybody has questions about human trafficking or would like to reach out to you to talk to you about any of these subjects, what's a way that they can get in touch with you?
CSI has a website, and I'm trying to find the actual address for that specific one. But if you look up on the website, CSI LLC, there's like a main contact, and there's an email for that contact. My email is amiller@csiinvestigators.com.
Perfect.
So did you find the email?
Yeah, it's well, the web address, just to make sure we have it correct, is www.csiinvestigators.com. So that's CSIINVESTIGATORS.com. And so from there, it sounds like they can navigate to the human trafficking section of the website, or use your email address. Just want to make sure everybody has that out there if they have questions. And is there anything anything you think you can think of you'd want to impart on people before we go? I know we've talked about a lot here.
Yeah, just really quickly, I just want to make sure that everyone listening understands no child can be a prostitute, right? And we don't really use the words trafficking. We don't like to tell children you're being trafficked, or you're a trafficker, or you're in a trafficking. That word trafficking is very scary. It will shut them down. That's why they use the term CSEC. It's very light, and it means commercial sexual exploitation of a child, because they don't know they're even a victim. And until they need to go through their own journey to fully understand what has happened to them. And that's not for us to do. We are just in their world because they are allowing us to be.
Well, and anybody who's raised a teenager or a preteen understands you can't tell them anything right or wrong as it is to begin with. So, you're right. You have to, I'm sure, come into this gently, make sure that they have some time to digest it all. But
yes, it's an extremely traumatic experience for them. It's complex trauma, which is more than one trauma. And it's just sometimes, a lot of survivors will live with it for the rest of their lives. There's coping skills, of course, that you can learn along the way, and, treatments here or there, but it's not something that will ever go away. You'll never forget.
Absolutely. Well, Ashley Miller of CSI Investigations, thank you so much for the good work you're doing and sharing your stories and expertise with us today. Jeff Stiegler, as always, thank you for joining this podcast episode. I'd invite everybody out there listening, if you like this and other topics, to subscribe to the Data Discourse podcast. Stay tuned to the next episode, which should be coming out soon. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.